Well, it's been a case of the boy who cried wolf for oil markets over the last week. We've had so many instances of geopolitical risks resulting in premium on the oil price, only for nothing to have happened. So that when the war actually broke out last weekend, the oil price reaction was relatively muted until last Friday. And what we saw last Friday was the Qatari energy minister finally came out and made some comments about the degree and scope of this energy impacts, which amounts to an energy crisis. And that's been the wake-up call for markets to suddenly see big spikes in oil prices over the weekend. This scenario where you're seeing an existential fight by the Iranian regime is the kind of doomsday energy market scenario that has been war-gamed since the 1970s, when we had the Iranian Revolution and the Arab oil embargo creating oil price shocks. It portends one of the biggest disruptions to oil and gas markets that has been seen, potentially even larger in scope than the Ukraine war in 2022, when Russia turned off its gas to Europe. And we haven't seen any spikes really of this magnitude until going back as far as the 1970s. Even then, if you look at the scope of the passage and the importance of the passage of the Strait of Hormuz, a continued disruption to flows here would portend 3 times the impact to oil and gas markets that we saw during the oil shocks in the 1970s. What we will see is it all comes down to is how long will the current full disruption of flows out of the Strait of Hormuz continue for. So every day that this lasts, we should expect on balance that oil inches upwards. There are bearish scenarios for it if we see, for example, a de-escalation of the conflict, or what is perhaps more likely, some passage through the Strait of Hormuz returns once the US and its allies in Europe put in place a Navy-escorted convoy system plus insurance measures. But even then, there will still be some significant disruptions to flow because the convoy system will be inherently slower than what prevailed previously. And in particular, gas could be impacted a lot more than oil, because oil you can still get some of the Saudi oil and the UAE oil out without the Strait of Hormuz, but LNG is 100% dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. So a stable oil environment, which encourages investments but is relatively affordable by the international community, is seen to be in the $60 to $80 a barrel range. Now we're well outside of that range. And the market can withstand that for a short period of time, but if it's prolonged, it will start to have inflationary impacts, not just at the bowser when one goes to fill up your car, but it filters through to nearly every other part of the economy, and that's going to put upward pressure on inflation globally. See reserves banks having to take mitigation measures in that regard. There's a reason that Iran is pursuing this strategy of weaponizing energy and causing a global energy crisis, which could in turn cause a global economic crisis and put political pressure on some of the actors here. That is a very deliberate strategy on that part. But I think what the US will want to see is make sure it doesn't reward Iran's strategy here of weaponizing global energy. I think many of the parties in the Middle East, including some of the Gulf states, also don't want to be seen to be rewarding this kind of belligerent behavior on the part of Iran, and won't let them use energy as the weapon that they want it to be. So Japan has over half a year's worth of strategic stocks. China has longer than that. China has over 1 billion barrels of storage and climbing. They've really taken advantage of the discounted sanctioned crude out of Russia and Venezuela over the last year or so. And the US's SPR, unfortunately, is quite low due to sales during the Ukraine war. But overall, the oil market is positioned to withstand a 5 to 10 million barrel a day shortage, at least for a few months. And so again, there is still time here to not necessarily end the conflict, but at least return part or significant part of the flows and work out some of the logistical workarounds to avoid the Strait of Hormuz for oil. I think when oil was only in the $70 to $80 range in the wake of the war. It was clearly a situation of market complacency. But now that oil's back, up above $100, I think it's much more accurately pricing the different scenarios going forward on a risk-adjusted basis. And I don't think we're yet in a situation where we need to say panic in the market or acute shortages. There's still time to have workarounds and progress the developments in the Middle East before we get to that point.